Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Tech Talks with Santosh. And today we have a special guest, Corbin. So Corbin is going to explain us about React Native, and then we will be talking a little bit about Gitshark, the product he has been building, and the learnings he had from Gitshark. So welcome to the show, Corbin.
Thanks, Santosh. Thanks for having me. I'm the founder of OceanBit, which is kind of like a side gig that I'm doing for my company. And then we have a product called Gitshark. Gitshark is a React Native app, so we use a lot of native code inside of our app, but we have React Native as the front end. And then I'm a dev advocate for CodaPad as my full-time day job, and then I write blog posts and some other stuff on our blog called Unicorn Utterances.
Oh, that's great. So I hope you're loving your new job. We were just discussing about it.
Yeah, it's been a good time. I've been excited to get into developer relations for a long time. So it's exciting to be in a role that I've been trying to get into for a long time.
That's true. I mean, because I have been talking to Corbin on another channel, the private group which we have, and he was really excited to finally start working as a dev advocate because he wanted to do it from a long time. And congratulations for that.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. So let's go ahead and get started with the first question. Of course, when we start with React Native, right? So or any language, we actually have to go through the prerequisite. So what are the prerequisites to learn or start learning React Native?
So when I'm gonna step back and answer what is a prerequisite to learning React, and then I'll answer the question about React Native specifically. So when I talk to students who are like, oh, should I pick React or Vue or Angular? I tend to guide them depending on what they're looking for. So it's kind of contextual. But usually I find that React, particularly their documentation, relies on a prerequisite knowledge of ECMAScript 6 a bit, right? Like their documentation includes but doesn't talk about destructuring a whole lot. Right, you see destructuring in a lot of code bases. You see the spread operator in a lot of code bases. The map operator is really popular for iterating through items. And if you're not familiar with what is and is not JavaScript, so like what is JSX, what is JavaScript, what is React, those lines can get really blurry, and it can make it really confusing what you are and are not working on. React Native takes it a step further. And now not only do you have to worry about what is React, what is JavaScript, etc. Now you also have to worry about, okay, which of these components is React, like the fragments, and which one of them are React Native, like Vue. So I think that having React knowledge and having JavaScript knowledge will definitely help you. That said, I worked in React for about a year professionally, and I'd done other frameworks before then, and I was able to jump into React Native fairly smoothly once I had a firm grasp on React. So luckily the learning curve from React to React Native is not too bad.
So that's and ES6, right? So you have to, of course, if you're working with React, you have to be aware of ES6. So.
Right. Yeah, because you have the map operator to be able to make a list of items show up in JSX. In fact, I'm sure there is some way, but I just don't know of how to do that with a for loop. Like you have to kind of have some intrinsic knowledge about ES6. So yeah, it's just definitely something to keep in mind when you're looking to get into React or React Native.
Just wanted to understand how much knowledge of React we need. It's like you have to fully understand React before you jump into React Native. It's like I can directly start with React Native and I can learn all together.
Right. Yeah. So I personally went the route of React to React Native, but most of that is because of my background, right? I started as a web developer. I had a lot of experience in CSS and stuff, and I was able to transfer that knowledge to React Native. Now, the nice part about React Native is that even their CSS bindings, because under the hood, React Native is not using CSS, it's using native APIs to draw the code, right? But it has a syntax that looks identical to CSS, and you can learn CSS and learn a lot of these things from React Native first, rather than going React to React Native. So if you wanted to start with React Native, totally viable. It's just a different approach from what I took. So
So anyways, we were about to talk about this, but Parijat has this question as well. So what about the setting up your dev environment? So what are the tools which you need?
So, if you're planning on to develop for iOS, you have to have a Mac, and that's just a prerequisite for building an iOS app, regardless of what framework you use. You're just not able to build an iOS app without Xcode yet. But outside of iOS, you need to be able to have Android Studio. Well, you don't need Android Studio, but it helps a lot. You basically need Android Studio. You need the Android emulators. There's also, if you're starting to get into end-to-end, or end-to-end testing, you need a version of AOSP rather than a Google API. The difference there is that Google wraps their emulators with certain like permissions and stuff, and some of their APIs work differently from one to the other, at least for testing. So you need a version of Android that works with AOSP. You need a computer that'll allow you to do, I forget what it's called, but it's basically emulation, like VT, I think is the Intel version. And what that allows you to do is it allows you to emulate the Android emulator. But you can also, like, I have a testing phone. This is my main phone, but somewhere around here, I have a testing phone, and you can actually use a physical hardware to be able to test, which is really cool. So yeah, there's not a ton of hardware requirements. You're able to build with React Native even with a relatively low power computer.
So even VS Code will work, right? So unless you have to go and compile it.
Yeah. So you can use VS Code for everything. I tend to use WebStorm as well, just because that's my preferred IDE. Both of them work fantastically. And if you're building like Gitshark has native code, you can use Xcode for Objective-C or Swift, and you can use Android Studio for Kotlin or Java to be able to hook into native code from JavaScript, which we'll touch on a little bit later.
So now, as we know about the prerequisites, what is required on your machine. So how to get started? From where, or how you started? So I'll be interested. Actually, everyone will be interested to know that as well.
Yeah. So honestly, I pulled up the React Native documentation. So like if you go to, it's reactnative.dev. So if you go to reactnative.dev, they have pretty good documentation for how to get started. So they mention prerequisites. They have like interactive examples. Their examples take a little while because they're running on Expo, which is different from React Native. It's React Native, but they add additional requirements on top of it, which we can touch on. I think that actually might be a good idea to talk about at some point. But they also, where's installation? Oh, come on. I know they have it. Getting started. They must have it. Introduction, prerequisites, core. At any rate, they do have installation guide somewhere. I'm just not able to find it right away. So they have an installation guide that helps you build a boilerplate. They have a lot of great examples for some basic stuff. And honestly, when I started learning, I found open source code bases, and I started diving into how they did it. So being able to understand, this is what like the equivalent of a div is, or this is what the equivalent of a text input is. Once you start doing some of these mental mappings and learning the restrictions of JSX, it gets much smoother for development. For reference, if anyone is interested to actually look through the source code, Gitshark is completely open source. I don't know if I'm able to share this, but thank goodness that didn't show my phone number. I would have sworn that would have shown my phone number, and that would have been hilarious. But yeah, so like Gitshark is completely open source. So if anyone wants to actually like read through the code and see how it's done, you can do that. But yeah, that's how I did it. I was looking through open source projects and just found a few. I don't even remember which ones I was looking at, but I had found a few, and I was like, oh, okay, so that's how you do it. Interesting. So, yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about a few of the features. I mean, which
of React Native
has. Yep.
Yeah. So React Native is it. So the most obvious part about React Native that's really nice is that you can build the app once and have it work for different platforms, right? So I have built Gitshark's UI, and now it works on iOS. It will eventually work on Windows. It'll eventually work on Mac OS. And when I say eventually, that's on me, not anything else. I'm just waiting for a few dependencies, basically. And that's super cool, right? Like I have the ability to build one app for 4 different platforms. But with any application, there are restrictions, right? You have to be able to use native code at some point. And that's the really nice part about React Native. Not only are you able to build your logic in JavaScript, and you like, let's say that you're building a simple time tracking application. You can keep this entirely in your app in JavaScript and just keep using JavaScript and React Native and just stay there, right? You don't need any native code most of the time. But anytime that you need any native code, you can just write it, right? So like Gitshark has, I think, 2,000 or 3,000 lines of Java to manage some native code that we need to work on. That's required to get the app running, that otherwise the app would have been dead in the water, right? Likewise, on iOS, we have a lot of Objective-C code. So like that ability to be able to call native code on your device from JavaScript is super powerful. So one of the features that's relevant to React Native is actually a feature of Expo. If it's okay with you, Santosh, I'd love to talk a little bit about like what Expo is and how it differs and stuff. Cool. So Expo is a framework built on top of React Native that is managed by like a huge I think they're a consultancy company. I could be wrong, but a huge company. They manage it very well. And what it allows you to do is, let's say that I'm on the React Native docs, right? And it shows me a QR code. What I can do is I can scan that QR code and it'll show up on my phone. The entire app will just instantly load off a QR code. I don't have to do a development build. I don't have to do basically anything to get my app running. Super advantageous for doing production builds or beta builds where you're testing with testers. For QA, it's like super advantageous for a ton of different reasons, right? And you can even make it like if you're working at a remote company, you can send someone a QR code and suddenly have 80 people trying your new version of the app, which is super cool, right? The downside to Expo is that one, you have to use a specific CLI for it. You can't just use React Native CLI. And 2, you lose the ability to hook into native code. There are some ways around that, but for the most part, if you need native code, you will not be using Expo. And I've found Expo is incredibly useful if you're able to utilize it, but I found that most of the applications that at least I tend to think of require some native APIs at some point. So I tend to need to eject. So just something to keep in mind for your next project.
That's good. So, okay, let's talk about some of the disadvantages which we have for React Native.
Yeah, so with any bridging code, right? Because that's what React Native is. React Native is running a JavaScript engine. That JavaScript engine allows you to be able to run JavaScript in a native environment. In any environment that's going to be using bridging in that case, you're going to end up with a scenario where you have a lower performance, right? So it's not going to be as performant as, say, a native app. You're going to end up running into some restrictions. You're able to avoid some of that by writing some of your code in. So we had original version of Gitshark that used JavaScript instead of native code to do some logic. And when we did, it took, I think it was something around 115 seconds to do one operation. And you were just waiting on a blank screen until that operation finished, right? And that's really, really, really bad for a native app. Once we refactored a native code, 4 seconds at most. Wow. Like, we're talking huge differences, right? And a lot of that is because of the way that I was doing it. It was calling native to JavaScript to native to JavaScript back and forth, which causes huge latency issues. But I mean, you're going to run into some performance limitations. You also don't have the ability to access certain APIs. Like to be able to hook into some APIs is just as difficult using React Native than it is native code, right? So like a great example is I wanted to get my file system running in Gitshark, and I had to write it in native code. Well, now I have to write this bridging code, and I have to write the state management. And like it's kind of tricky to be able to maintain that native code with React Native code because you're juggling between. I mean, I'm using Objective-C, this, like it's 5 different programming languages, right, in one project. So that's certainly a disadvantage to just being able to say, okay, we have 2 apps, Kotlin and Swift. We're keeping both those programming languages. That's it. 2 languages, not 5. So there's a lot of contextual, like it depends on what you're trying to do. You know, I wouldn't make a game in React Native, or at least not a high performance one. But it depends on what you're trying to do. I've been lucky enough, at least with performance in the UI, to be able to build animations, a lot of them, into our app, and they're fairly performant, which is nice to see. So,
yeah, cool. So, okay. So let's move on to our next question, which is related to, of course, Gitshark. So, what what are the learnings you had from Gitshark? I mean, you built an entire product in React Native. So,
yeah,
do you want to share it with us?
Totally. So I think a lot of my learnings with Gitshark have actually been non-technical, if that makes any sense. And I think that, like, I know the question you're asking is like, what learnings have I had with React Native? And I want to answer that, but like addressing the first thing is like, I was surprised by how long it took me to get to a stable product, right?
Okay.
Because when I started with Gitshark, we had a super rough draft version done within maybe 2 months, right?
Okay.
It's a year later, and some of those screens have not changed, at least not visually. But what has changed is we added error handling, we added translations, we added we rewrote the entire logic in native code to avoid out-of-memory issues. Like, it seems like nothing much has changed, but in reality, there's been a ton of work under the hood to go from super beta MVP to ready for production. Let's get this in people's hands. And it's important to recognize that even if you don't feel like you're making much progress, you are. And it's okay to go at your own pace, and that you're not beholden to any, like, you know, you're not beholden to anyone, at least for your projects, right? So I think that that's the most important learning that I've had with Gitshark, you know, which is like kind of silly, but like, you know, I until I looked at the line of code counter, I was a little upset with myself, like, man, I should have done it faster. And then I looked at how many lines of code, and there's like 16,000 lines of code in this one app. And I'm like, okay, never mind. I don't feel bad anymore.
That's really big.
Yeah. So that's the first thing to keep in mind. But some of the learnings that I've had regarding to React Native, their animation library is fantastic. Legitimately some of the best animation code I've ever had the pleasure of writing across CSS and any framework I've ever worked in. I have not yet needed a CSS solution that React Native comes with a CSS solution out of the box. I've not needed to eject from that yet, and I've been really happy with the solution that they've used. What else? The UI looks really good, but that's because I have a designer. If you're able to get a designer for your projects, if you're not good at it like me, because I'm very bad at design, and Ed is our designer, and he's fantastic, legitimately amazing. Actually, I can show the app, or like show the website a bit, so you guys can see what I'm talking about. The website was also designed by him. Like we have these pretty little bubbles floating in the corner that you can mess with. Like, app looks good. That can work. Yeah, so like this is an example. Well, that screen is a lie. This screen works. But yeah, this is an example of like what the app looks like. And I just think it looks good. So I've been very pleased with Ed's work on all of this. The other thing is I underestimated how much native code would be required for this project. Because one of the things I didn't consider when going into Gitshark was the native code, or rather the memory constraints. When you're on phone, you have maybe 26 megabytes of RAM to get by, right?
Right.
So what happens when you try to download a 300 megabyte file? It's not ideal if you're trying to keep it all in memory, right? You need to stream that to your file system and then stream from the file system, you know. So streaming is way important that I didn't recognize. And because of that, I had to rewrite a lot of my code to support streaming. And there's no way to support streaming from native to JavaScript. You have to keep it all native. Oh. So that's been a tricky solution. So like what the code used to look like is we used to have this FS file. Let me see if I can find it really quickly. We used to have this FS file. Come on. And it would say things like stat would check if it's a symbolic link, and then do React Native fs.stat, right? Same thing with read file. Read file or write file would take your contents, encode it into base 64, and then write that file, right? And the problem is that we were trying to write 300 megabytes, and you're trying to send a 300 megabyte string to this, and then you're running out of memory is what would happen. Yeah. So what we had to do is we had to rewrite all of that code into main Java. We had to rewrite all that code into Java, which has been fun because I'm not a Java dev. So it's been interesting learning these programming languages as I go. So yeah, the nice part is that once you have foundational programming concepts, learning new languages isn't too bad, especially if you have example code. And there's a lot of example code linking Java or native APIs to React Native. So yeah, those would be some of my learnings.
That's great. So just to ask one question, right? So you went through that React Native doc, and the example we saw was Expo. Any particular reason React Native is itself promoting Expo?
So I think part of it is that Expo is a huge partner of theirs. Right? Expo literally writes code for React Native, is part of their release cycle. Like Expo is a huge partner of theirs, I think is the first step. The second step is that you have to look at it from ease of use or ease of demo, right? With Expo, scan the phone, app is on your phone, you're done, right? React Native, you download the React Native project, you compile it, you run it, and then it's on your phone, right? So it's the difference between setting up your computer for every dependency that you have, downloading the project, running the project, installing the dependencies, 7 or 8 steps, right? Versus 1 or 2 steps. And I think that's the biggest reason is that it's a lot easier to get started with Expo. But React Native, without Expo, it's much more powerful with what it can do.
Oh, okay. So, but once I actually start with Expo, I can easily move out and leave the Expo and use the select.
Yeah, you can eject from the projects that you're, just like in React Native or React CLI, Create React App. You can eject from there to get a Webpack project. You can do very similarly with Expo. You can eject from Expo to get to React Native.
Oh, so okay. Yeah. But of course, you have to actually figure out it at some point of time, right? Otherwise, it will be really too late, and then you are stuck.
Right. Yeah. So honestly, either way, I just suggest getting started. You'll find out what limitations you run into eventually. And there's nothing wrong with going, okay, I made a mistake. We have to go back and reanalyze and redo some things, right? Because that's exactly what I did with Gitshark, right? We had some really good, I can't tell you how long I spent on that FS file, right? That FS file is what? Okay, it's fairly short, but I rewrote it a ton of times. So I spent a lot of time trying to get that working. And it just didn't as much as I wanted to, and tried. And I got around all these obstacles. I finally hit this brick wall that was like, all right, you have to go back now. And that's okay, right? At least I know that now for my next project. At least I'm familiar with what that does and why, there's nothing wrong with learning by trial, right? So honestly, if you want to start working in React Native or you're interested in Expo and what it has to offer, use it, see how it works, So,
okay. Yeah. Okay. So I just wanted to ask this question. I mean, I'm sure you might be aware, Ionic actually launched the support for React. So I can just compile my React app and create a mobile app. So what are your thoughts about that? I mean, is it going to get React Native out of market? I usually don't ask this question, but what are your thoughts on that? Ionic supporting React.
So supporting React in what way? Like are you talking about like building a React app and then adding a React Native app on top of it, or like?
Okay, so Ionic recently, not recently, but it's been more than a year. So they launched the support for React, so you can
Okay.
actually write in React code, convert it to mobile app. It
Huh.
can be Android or iOS both. I
That's
mean,
cool.
they already had support for Angular from a longer time. They started with Angular basically. So they started with Angular JS, and then they migrated to Angular, and then post that they added support for React. Now they have started support for Vue.js. So now
Yeah.
you can actually take the Vue.js code, convert it to mobile app, maybe your Android app or iOS app, anything. So they have been doing it.
Yeah. So what's the difference between that and React Native?
Yeah,
Gotcha.
that's what I mean.
Yeah.
So
So yeah, there's a lot of competitors to React Native, right? There's Xamarin, there's NativeScript,
right.
there's even Ionic. There's tons of different options out there. I think that one of the strongest advantages is being able to call native code. But I know you can even I can't remember for sure, but I want to say you can do that with NativeScript. The other advantage is that you're in a vast ecosystem, a huge ecosystem. I have had to write maybe 2 different libraries for React Native, and that's just because I wanted to. They were not required to make the app run. Meanwhile, when I last, granted, it's been a few years, so keep that in mind. When I last used NativeScript, I had to write a lot of native code, like a lot more native code, and build different libraries and stuff. So for me, the ecosystem in React Native is much larger. It's supported by both Microsoft and Facebook, and like there's at least 3 or 4 major players that are supporting React Native. Because most people don't know this, but Microsoft is actually using React Native for even Office, which is really cool. So a lot of huge support for it. Further, I don't think NativeScript, I think Xamarin might through Electron, but most projects don't tend to support Windows or Mac OS, right? So those are 2 platforms that React Native can support. That's something to keep in mind. React Native also has the ability to run a web application. So you can use one platform to be able to build logic for iOS, web, and Android. So you can build 3 different apps using React Native, which is kind of funny to use React Native for the web, even though it's called native, right? That's kind of silly.
Yeah.
But there are some advantages. In fact, I'm using React Native Web to build Storybook components for my components in Gitshark, kind of like a way to re-implement some of Expo's functionality. But yeah, I think it depends on the project, right? If you have an existing code base in Angular, I'm not going to tell you to rewrite your app in React Native. If it doesn't make sense, right? But if you're starting with a new app and you're looking for good ecosystem, good support, ability to eject to use native code, I personally went with React Native, but that's mostly because I wanted to learn React Native, right? So there could likely be better alternatives out there that I'm just not aware of.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Sounds good. So because they recently launched and they really have some good stats to show, because most of the apps which is on Play Store which is actually built using React plus Ionic. So actually they saw really good growth. Probably many React applications were there, just they wanted to create an app and they figured out a way, right? So Ionic can do that for them.
That's awesome.
Okay. Okay, so let's move on to our last question probably for the day. So what are the suggested resources to learn React Native?
Yeah. So honestly, I think that the open source ecosystem has a lot to support here. One of the biggest ways that I learned React Native was actually using this library called React Native Paper. So this is the library maintained by a company called CallStack. Fantastic group of people. They're very supportive of open source requests. I even tweeted at them about a question, and they're like, "Oh, hey, that's actually a bug. Would you be interested in fixing it?" And they got it merged within like 2 days, super quick.
Wow.
But yeah, so they're a material design themed UI for your app, and it looks really good if you want to just use it like that. But what I've ended up doing is if you go to their GitHub, you can actually read through their source code, right? So what I've been doing is I've been going through components and starting with some basic ones like card, right? So like we can look at card, and there we go. I can see surface. I can see touchable without feedback, view. Some of this is a little more complicated, but that's not a big problem. But like I can understand how I can begin to structure these things. And then what I do is like, okay, what is on long press, right? Then we can take a look at what on long press is in React Native. And it'll bring me, I mean, there's articles about this, but then there's also the official docs about handling touches, so on long press. So, you know, there's a lot of different ways to learn these things, but I just happened to look through source code and read through these. And that was React Native paper handles things really well. So like huge shout out to them, and their code base has been fantastic to learn through. But yeah, there's all sorts of other ways to do it. The official documentation is pretty good. So reactnative.dev, they have components and docs that you can read through. So like talking about design and interaction and all sorts of other stuff. So definitely a lot to be able to learn through and read through here, if nothing else. So yeah.
Oh. Any courses you have in your mind which you want to suggest?
You know, unfortunately not. I don't tend to learn through video series very well, especially because I've taken a very weird path with my career. Like I started with Angular for a few years, and I did React, and then I had all this knowledge about React and Angular, and it was like, all right, React Native, haha, you know, like it's just been a very weird path. So I don't have any video series, unfortunately. Actually, if you're looking to learn React itself, one of the best courses that I've seen is Kent C. Dodd's course. And of course I misspelt his name. What is it called? I think it's called, I can't find it. Epic React. There we go. Yeah. You just said it, but I was like looking for it on the Google. Epic React. It's expensive if you're like just an indie developer, but very in depth for learning some of the most complex stuff about React that took me a long time. So, yeah.
Yeah, actually, this course is right. So it's really costly in case you are a developer from India, because of course no one will be able to afford $600 to actually pay.
Yeah.
So
and that's the unfortunate part.
Yeah.
So, probably, but there's much cheaper resources out there, and they may work better for you. You know, I have a very narrow radar of courses to recommend, and I might be working on my own. keep an eye out for it. But yeah, there's a very narrow list of resources that I know of. So just because I suggest something doesn't mean it's the only option out there. There's tons and tons of fantastic content out there. So. It seems like we have a question that's actually pretty good. Can I explain the difference between React and React Native?
Yeah, just saw that. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So the main difference between React and React Native is actually, I'll show you. So let's create a TypeScript file where I create two different components, one between React and one between React Native. I don't want a new TypeScript file. I want a new Scratch file. There we go. All right. So let's say const React comp and const, I can spell React Native comp. So both of these are valid React components right now, right? The only, I don't know why that's giving you an error, but the only difference is when I do like in a normal React component, we're using HTML, right? Because we're binding to the browser. What I can do is I can do return div, paragraph tag, hello, right? And that would be valid JSX. problem is that React Native needs to bind to native UI elements, right? It needs to bind to touchables and so on and so forth, right? So instead, in React Native, it would be something like this. So instead of div, you'd have a view. Instead of p, you'd have a text. So there's different tags that you can use. You can still use like react.useEffects. That's still valid between the two, so you can share all of your logic. Even in Gitshark, I'm using Redux, so you can use Redux in your React Native apps. But yeah, the biggest difference is that React Native allows you to do native code. It allows you to do like views or different tags instead of what you're used to. And that allows you to run on iOS and Android. So you're mentioning regarding performance, what is the difference? And the answer is it's not really a performance thing. It's more React Native allows you to run on multiple platforms. React itself is more of a baseline that only works in the browser right now.
Yep.
So that's kind of the biggest difference between the two.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think we don't have any questions anymore. Next question for you, Corbin. So anything you want to promote on the channel?
Sure. So actually, I'm doing a live stream today in an hour on my company's Twitch. Here, let me link that. We're going to be doing some interview question creation. So that'll be cool if anyone's interested in looking at how you create interview questions and like what you're capable of doing, stuff like that. Outside of that, Gitshark is going to be releasing right now it's in closed beta. It's going to be open beta, even though it's more stable than any app I've ever built. But it's going to be releasing really soon. So I'm excited about that. iOS version is coming quickly, I hope. Depends on whenever I'm able to build that Objective-C code. I hate Objective-C. But that's just because I don't like the syntax and because I'm not used to it is what it is. So I'm just being tongue-in-cheek.
Okay.
Yeah, we're moving forward on Gitshark. Yeah, that's the gist of it. That's most of it. So
great. So you can actually follow Corbin on this Twitch handle, so you will be able to just follow him, so you'll be able to get the alerts whenever he goes live. So it's around still have around 45 minutes, right, Corbin?
Yeah. So in 50 minutes I'll be live.
Yeah, at 50 minutes he will be live, and you can catch him. Apart from that, I think yes, so we don't have any question anymore. So thanks a lot for joining us, Corbin, and sharing everything with us. So in case Corbin, anyone has question, where they can reach out to you?
So the easiest way to reach out to me would probably be Twitter.
So you can
Twitter. Sorry, I'm trying to send these links to make it easier for you. You can reach out to me on Twitter. Otherwise, if you can find me on Discord, we have so if you go to unicorn-about, you can find our Discord, which I'm pretty active in there. Unicorn Utterances is of course our coding blog. But yeah, please feel free to reach out to me with any questions. I do pair programming with newcomer developers, so even if you're like super stuck or you want to do a one-on-one discussion, please reach out to me. I'd be happy to schedule time. My DMs are open. So yeah, please feel free to reach out.
Thanks a lot. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's it for the day. So we will have another episodes, our upcoming episodes in next week. So let me just tell you about next week. What are the plans? So we have 2 episodes actually coming in next week. First episode will be on 22nd, where we will be talking about Ionic and the DevRel of Ionic. He'll be with us. His name is Eli, and he'll be talking more about Ionic and what Ionic is and what are the plans. And then on 23rd, so it's like back-to-back 2 episodes, we will have another guest, another great community member. He'll be talking about full stack generators. That's something which we will announce soon on Twitter. So yep, that's 2 episodes coming next week. And you can also follow me on Twitch. So I'm going to start this Getting Started Angular course, which will be live streamed every weekend, 6 to 8 p.m. So in case you are interested to learn Angular, feel free to actually join us on live stream, and you can also ask questions. So yep, that's it for the day. So thanks a lot for joining us, everyone. Bye bye.
Yeah, thank you.